be recording the program today so that folks can view it who weren't able to attend, I guess not in person, but virtually in person today. We won't be recording the breakout room discussions, but we will be recording this section of the program today. So that's our housekeeping notes. I do want to next just say thank you to the Birmingham Jewish Community Relations Council who co-sponsored today's program. I know Joyce is on this Zoom somewhere and helped bring this program into being. Today's program is the 5th installment in Bethel's Tirdof series on civil rights past and present, and it's the 2nd program that we've partnered with the JCRC on. So we really appreciate their support of both this programming series and our civil rights project. They've been just amazing partners in bringing these programs to Zoom with us. For those of you who are joining a Tirdof program for the first time, welcome. And for those who joined for previous workshops on having difficult conversations, Southern Jews and civil rights, and Jewish diversity, welcome back. Tirdof is the programming arm of the Bethel Civil Rights Experience, a multimedia project exploring the intersections of Birmingham's Jewish and civil rights histories. Tirdof, the name of the programming series, draws from the phrase tzedek tzedek tirdof, which translates to justice, justice you shall pursue. So through both the civil rights experience, which will come to full fruition with a visitor site and an app-based audio tour in fall of 2021, and our programming series, which we are midway through right now, we are and have been engaging in fruitful conversations about racial justice, past and present, a theme that is very much relevant to the work of the Jefferson County Memorial Project. And I hope that many of you will continue to join us for Tirdof programming in spring of 2021, including an exciting driving dinner tour coming after the new year, which we're going to be releasing details on soon. So definitely keep an eye on all of the Temple Bethel channels for more information about that opportunity. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce Joi Brown, Director of the Jefferson County Memorial Project. The Jefferson County Memorial Project is a grassroots coalition with the following 4 goals: to research the 30 documented victims of racial terror and their descendants in Jefferson County, to educate the public on the importance of this history, to place historical markers at lynching sites, and to retrieve the Jefferson County Monument from the National Memorial for Peace and Justice. I know that was quite a mouthful, but Joi will be telling us more about that. And to advocate for reform where racial injustice still exists today. Before she was director, Joi Brown was already a founding core coalition member of the Jefferson County Memorial Project and was the marketing manager for the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute. So welcome, Joi. I personally have so much respect for the work that JCMP does and am so excited to hear from you today. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and spotlight you and hand it over to you.
Thank you, Margaret, and thank you for saving me that mouthful. I was actually prepared to do that mouthful of explaining exactly what the Jefferson County Memorial Project is, and probably from here on out, I will refer to the Jefferson County Memorial Project as JCMP, just for time's sake. But I'm so excited to be here today. Thank you again to Bethel for having myself and the Jefferson County Memorial Project. I am so excited to actually brag about you and your work, Margaret, a little bit later in my presentation when I talk about the research goal of what we do. I would like to, let me share my screen first. As many Zooms as I've done at this point, sharing my screen, it still seems to somehow take me a while. So bear with me just a moment. Okay, there we go. So as Margaret explained, we are a grassroots coalition that formed to help educate those in Jefferson County about our own county's history and past of racial terror and lynchings that occurred here after Reconstruction, and to still advocate around where those injustices still exist today, and to really help make that connection of, you know, slavery and lynching to present day mass incarceration. So before we dive a little bit deeper into the work that we do, I'm not sure how familiar everyone is with the work of the Equal Justice Initiative and Brian Stevenson and the work they're doing out of Montgomery and their new museum that opened up in 2018. So I'd like to start with a video just to kind of introduce you to their work. It'll help explain some of the work that we're doing locally.
In 2010, we began thinking about creating a project that would go beyond our traditional work in the criminal justice area, deepening the conversation about race in this country, both inside and outside of the criminal justice system. We wanted to kind of begin educating people about things related to racial history that we didn't think most people knew. And we wanted to just have a more informed conversation about where we are in this country when it comes to race and racial inequality. There is an historical context that's really key to understanding these issues. You can't understand the plight of African Americans in America without first understanding slavery and the trauma and the degradation that slavery created. And you can't understand the next century without understanding African Americans were subjected to terror from the end of Reconstruction until World War II, lynching and convict leasing and the threats of daily racial violence. And then, of course, the segregation era, the Jim Crow era, where we talk a lot about the laws, but we don't talk about the daily humiliation that African Americans had to internalize of constantly being marginalized, constantly being talked down, constantly being disrespected, and what that did to people and their psyche. And also what it did to majority people who were actually being taught that they were better than other people because of their skin color. It's a really an abusive thing to do. And then finally, mass incarceration, where we have actually acculturated whole segments of our society into believing that incarceration is inevitable. All of that became something that we felt the need to address in a more detailed and nuanced way, understanding the legacy of that history. What does it mean to have enslaved people in this country for over 2 centuries? What does it mean to have traumatized African Americans for decades through legalized racial segregation and subordination? What does that era mean for us today? What does it represent? We want to seriously engage in truth and reconciliation. Countries that have suffered from decades and centuries of human rights abuses have not been able to move forward without committing themselves to a process of truth and reconciliation. In Rwanda, you've seen this. After the genocide, hundreds of thousands of people killed. You saw folks saying, no, we've got to talk about this in a way that was aimed at trying to get to reconciliation. In South Africa, at the end of apartheid, there was a recognition that that country could not move forward without an opportunity to give voice to what apartheid had done to them. And then people could talk about, now, how do we move forward? And we didn't do that in this country. At the end of the civil rights struggle, we changed some laws, but we refused to talk about what had happened. And because we didn't talk about it, we created this dynamic in America where there's all this tension, all of this conflict, all of this division. The legacy continues to haunt us. We are still very racially polarized. And that polarization manifests itself in day-to-day life. It's very difficult to go any place in America where you have racial diversity without finding racial conflict. We're not going to move forward on issues like race until we tell the truth about our history. We're not going to be able to reconcile ourselves to that history until we deal more honestly with what that history has done to all of us, not just people of color, to all of us.
All right, so that gives you a little bit of an idea, if you weren't already familiar with Brian Stevenson and the work that he does with the Equal Justice Initiative, what they do. So as we all know, we currently live in a broken society. I don't have to be a broken record to tell anyone that, but many don't make that connection from how we got to how slavery is connected to present day mass incarceration. Honestly, before I began doing this work and found my own personal connection to it, I wasn't extremely clear. But you have to understand that we went from slavery into after slavery during Reconstruction. You know, you didn't just go from this time period where we had this entire workforce of slaves to just slaves being freed. So there entered convict leasing. And Black codes that were created where, you know, slavery was illegal with the exception of prison labor. And so that's where you had the boom of incarceration, and you had, you know, people of color being arrested for very just small, minuscule crimes. You know, I will tell you a little bit more about my personal connection later, but, you know, had a great aunt who, if you met her, she was the smallest, tiniest, sweetest woman, but doing some research on my own family history, I was able to find criminal records for her for vagrancy. And I was honestly shocked because this was someone who I never would have imagined. And the craziest thing, she was about 13 at the time of these records. So you saw people having these records and being incarcerated and then becoming basically laborers in the mines. And that's where convict leasing became an issue. And then that follows through present day mass incarceration. You have people that are incarcerated at much higher rates, just simply due to this system that has followed through over time. And so, for time's sake, I will skip through a few slides. EJI opened initially to begin this conversation and for people to make these connections from how we got from slavery to present day mass incarceration. What you see here is the National Memorial for Peace and Justice. So there are actually two parts of the museum when you go to Montgomery. There's the Legacy Museum, which is inside, and it explains that connection. And then there's this memorial, the National Memorial for Peace and Justice. And each of these pillars that you see in the background and in the foreground are representative of all of the counties throughout the country that had Black people that were lynched. And the difference between those in the background and the foreground, those in the foreground are duplicates of each that you see hanging, and those are for retrieval, for each county to retrieve and erect those within their county. And so that is how the Jefferson County Memorial Project was formed. My experience visiting the National Memorial for Peace and Justice, I will be completely honest with you, when I went, at the time I was working for the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute, and you know, I've visited many museums. I've visited the National Holocaust Museum. I thought that I was someone that difficult history did not affect as much because I was already so immersed in it. So I knew going in here, I won't see anything that doesn't surprise me, that I haven't heard about before, that I hadn't already learned about. But as I was walking through, the pillars, they're arranged alphabetically by county, and I came to the Blount County marker. And I saw a name on there, and that name was Mac Brown. Now, I knew I had a Mac Brown in my family tree, but I just thought, surely Brown is such a common last name. There's no way that I have any relation to this Mac Brown that's on this marker. But there was just a nagging feeling inside of me that told me, just take a picture of it and investigate it a little bit later. And I did do that, and I found out that that was my second great-grandfather. And from that moment on, it was just, it's unexplainable. You know, you never expect to see one of your ancestors in a museum of, you know, subject matter like this. And so that's when it was deeply personal at that point. You know, we know this history, we know it happened to our own people, but until you have that personal connection, it seems unreal. And so from that point on, you know, as people started visiting in the Birmingham and Jefferson County area, people began talking. And I met with Jim Sokol at an event we were having at the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute. And it was just through organic conversations of, hey, have you been to the new EJI museum? What was your experience? Just through talking, that some of us in the community got together and said, hey, we need to form a coalition, a grassroots coalition, to bring our monument home. And that is how the Jefferson County Memorial Project formed. I've already told you all some of this stuff about what the memorial actually documents. So I will skip forward to what is it that we actually do. So everybody knows us as the group that is trying to bring our monument home, but we actually do a vast more amount of stuff than that. So as Margaret said, we have 4 goals of researching, educating, placing, and advocacy. The first goal of research, this is where I get to brag about Margaret. So every year we have a fellowship where we engage the 6 Jefferson County colleges and universities in doing research of these victims of Jefferson County that were victims of racial terror lynchings. Usually it's about 30 students. We started that way because we actually started with 29 victims and discovered a 30th victim our first year doing it, and the second year we discovered 3 more victims. And so the students work with advisors from those 6 colleges and universities to, the first year they research the victims and help bring their stories to light, because many times when you're researching these victims, the only information that you're able to find are newspaper clippings, and the newspaper clippings are written mostly by white media. And so the stories are pretty horrific. I will have to say that is how I was able to find information about my great-great-grandfather, and I can recall the newspaper articles referring to him as a Black demon. And so the first year, the students, they've really helped bring more information about who these victims were to light. And the second year's report was on how Jefferson County's own systems, like the law enforcement system, the media, economics, contributed to those racial terror lynchings. And our second goal of educate, that's where we really utilize our community partners. We have over 40 community partners now that help us to do that community engagement. So we really want it to be intentional around helping people learn about this history and have conversations about it, and really kind of facilitate reconciliation, but by giving people all different opportunities to join the conversation. So maybe you are not a reader, but you enjoy art. We partner with the Birmingham Museum of Art, UAB's AVA, Birmingham Civil Rights Institute to do joint art exhibitions. We have book clubs. We do community trainings on how to have these difficult conversations. Those were really popular this year with a year like 2020, as you can imagine. And it's really made it a very diverse, powerful discussion by having these different opportunities where people can join in learning about this history. So next, the goal of place. This is what everyone knows us for. Most folks know us for working toward bringing the large monument that will eventually be erected in Lynn Park. But we also have a goal of placing historical markers like the one you see here at Sloss Furnace around the county where these terror lynchings occurred. We're hoping, Margaret, and I hope I can say this, I feel pretty good about it, but we're hoping our next one will be in Irondale. Margaret has been instrumental on that team that is working toward erecting that marker there, but we also have ones going up in the Brookside community, Pratt City, Bessemer, and hopefully also the East Lake area. Just to be clear, because I often get a lot of questions about this, people ask, well, are there going to be 33 of these markers? No, there will not be. Oftentimes these lynchings occurred in the same vicinity or same area, so they're more so regionally aware around where these terror lynchings occurred. And last, but definitely not least, is our advocacy goal. This is a goal we really want to focus in closely on next year. We work closely with inmates at Donaldson Correctional Facility to try to advocate where some of these injustices still lie today. So that has been difficult. It's been especially difficult this year because we have not been able to get inside the facility due to COVID. But some of the ways that we help advocate for those incarcerated in our own county are by lifting their voices. So we have a blog on our website where they write poetry and do artwork, and it is listed on our website, but it's anonymous. And so it helps to be able to elevate their voices and share some of their experiences. We have also been able to get some of their work published in local media, as well as there's one of the men that are incarcerated there that's an amazing artist, and he does these drawings, and we've been able to put his drawings on note cards and sell them in local bookstores, as well as the Birmingham Museum of Art, and those proceeds then go back to him. And so we're really looking at ways that we can do more and expand our advocacy there. During the holiday season, we actually just wrapped up our holiday hygiene drive. Every year, we collect items that are then donated to the inmates there at Donaldson. Most of the time people ask, well, you know, doesn't the government provide that? Or, you know, why is there a need for that? But they are only able to purchase those items like soap and toothpaste and washcloths once a year, and they're marked up astronomically. So it's always a successful drive for us. We had 3 cars full of stuff this year. I am still sore from lifting boxes and delivering those items on Friday. But it's always very much so appreciated, and it's definitely, it makes a difference in the quality of life for them. And that is it. How can you get involved? I will type my email in the chat, and you can email me directly, or you can visit our website, jeffersoncountymemorial.com. I will also drop that in the chat. But I have said a lot. I want to make sure I leave time and room for questions. And so I will stop sharing my screen.
Thank you so much for that overview, Joi, of the work of both the EJI and JCMP. I definitely have some questions, but I want to give everyone else an opportunity first. So if anyone has a question they'd like to start on, please feel free to throw it in the chat. Otherwise, I will take the privilege of kicking it off.
I do see a question about the video that I showed in the chat. I will get that link before we get off of here and share it to the chat so you all can have the shareable video.
Great. Well, I'll kick off with a question then, since we don't have any coming in quite yet. One thing that I'm curious about is whether or not you ever receive resistance or pushback. In particular, I think most of like what I've heard has probably been around the marker and bringing the markers to Birmingham. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what that looks like and what sort of the response is when people, when you encounter any sort of, pushback or resistance to this work.
So I have never received it in person. People in general, the community has been very supportive and excited about the monument and the markers coming. What we find, I'll get back to the pushback in just a second. I will say what we often find is people wanting to put us at odds with the Confederate monument that now was in Lynn Park. And of course, I don't think it would take a rocket scientist to guess how I felt about the Confederate monument, but I always want to make it clear to people that this monument, our monument, was not a response to that, is not a response to that. We always wanted to make sure that it didn't get caught up in all of that controversy, because we didn't want that to take away from the sacredness and the memorialization of these lives, of these victims, even though of course they're connected, we know that, but that's probably the most, not pushback, but questions we get about it. Now, as far as pushback, the internet has made people a lot braver than they really are in person. And I can tell you, when I do news interviews, it never fails. Somebody looks me up on Facebook and feels the need to send me a very ugly message. I will never forget, I did an interview on CBS 42 and it aired at 6 o'clock. And at 6:10, I had a message from this man on Facebook that asked me, why couldn't Black people just get over it? And why would I want to erect a monument, a hate monument? And I need to just get over it because the Jews did. And I'll be very transparent with you all. It scared me. The fact that people think that way and are okay with being vocal about it and knowing that my face is out there. You know, people are crazy nowadays. You don't know what someone will do, and hate crimes are very real. We all know that. But as far as in-person pushback, no, it's always like an internet gangster that's doing something, unfortunately, and oftentimes those are cowards, needless to say, but it's still very real, and it's something that it's still something you absorb, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think you're right that the internet does make people quite more bold than they are in person. But well, I see we do have some questions coming in. So Kathy asks, what is the criteria to bring the marker home to Jefferson County?
Kathy, that is a great question. I'm so glad you asked that. So EJI, they announced that they would be releasing the markers in January 2019 initially. And so we were prepared, we got all of the city parks and board stuff all ironed out. But then I do believe that because there was such a huge interest, a national interest in the memorial, that they got overwhelmed. And so they slowed down the timeline tremendously and have not given us a new date. But they were very clear that they wanted to ensure that our coalition and all of the groups around the country doing this did the community engagement first, and were very intentional about, what the marker actually stood for, and not just placing a monument and, not actually doing the public education. So I wish I had a more straightforward answer for your question. There's not there's not a checklist, if you will. They just want to see these groups doing the community engagement, which we've been doing for 2 years now, going on 3 years, honestly. But it does seem like that they have had some time to kind of wrap their heads around the big demand they've had for the monuments, and that we will see movement on the actual monument this year. I hope I answered that as best as possible. It's we get kind of a gray area answer like that as well from them, but one thing that goes without question is they definitely want the community engagement work done first.
Yeah, and that's such a valuable part of this project. I'll say from just personal experience, working on the historic marker in Irondale, it's been so valuable to meet with that group and develop those relationships and part of formulating the text for the marker, etc. So I think our next question is from Lisa. She says, is there work being done on the voting rights of ex-convicts? What are their voting rights and what can we do about it?
That's a great question, Lisa. So a lot of you may not know, but so as we made the transition from Abigail Snyder being our director to myself this year, we also transitioned from Create Birmingham being our fiscal sponsor to we are now a project of Greater Birmingham Ministries. So it just was the perfect home for us because of the social justice work they have done for decades now. And we are working closely with them to kind of merge our programs a little bit. We work with the incarcerated, and they've already been doing the work with ex-convicts and voter restoration and just voting rights and voter education in general. And so that's something that is a bit new to us, just because we have focused so much on the incarcerated and not so much, ex-convicts. But that's something we're looking forward to. I wish I could give you an answer as far as what that will look like, but it's something that we're heavily focused on. Even though we don't have a major national election next year, we've got a mayoral elections, and even the people have to understand the smaller elections lead up to the bigger elections. So we're excited to work with their team that works specifically on voting rights to help, those that were incarcerated restore their rights.
And Dahlia points out here that Faith in Action is working on voter rights restoration. That is a great resource, Dahlia. And yeah, anything you'd like to say about that, Joi? Do you all have a relationship with them?
Yes, I'm trying to type in the chat as well to some of these direct questions I'm getting, but it's kind of hard. Yes, Faith in Action, they are amazing. I know Kara McClure over there. And we are working to try to get, we've got over 40 community partners, and that's where those community partners come in, help, we couldn't do this alone. Our hopes are that folks like Faith in Action will join us as a community partner to help extend our reach. But yeah, they have done amazing work this year, and I think they're really just getting started.
This is a great question that just came in. I'm sorry, I actually missed it. One sec. Disappeared in my chat. Okay, the question is, what kinds of explanations or context will be placed next to the monument?
That is a really good question. So because we kind of got put on hold for the monument for so long, we actually had started doing the work of interviewing architectural firms and renderings of what that might look like. And the next step literally would be to engage the community and show the designs of the actual, of course, the monument just won't get placed. There will be stuff around it. But that's where we want the community input. What does that look like? What would be most effective? We've already discussed that we know there should be an area for reflection. But, us as a core coalition of about 9 people, and then even more broader of all of our coalition and volunteers, we still want the community's input on what does that look like. So, COVID, it made us hold on a lot of stuff, but we're really hoping, even if it has to be virtually for the beginning half of next year, to engage the community and have basically town hall type meetings around what does that look like? How can we be intentional and respectful about telling this history?
Thank you. I've got another question that's come in. This is a really interesting one too. And I've actually worked on different projects dealing with this subject matter that deal with this in different ways. So I'm interested to hear your response, but are there any instances or efforts toward bringing the descendants of the people who participated in the lynchings together with the descendants of those who have been lynched for dialogue and reconciliation? And context for that question is that similar things have been done with the grandchildren of survivors and grandchildren of Nazis.
That's an excellent question. So I know that is one of our far-reaching goals. Absolutely. I can say, as a descendant of someone who was lynched in a different county, that it would be hard for me, but it would be powerful and it would be welcomed. That is one of our goals that we have, that the reason I say is far-reaching is because we haven't been able to successfully find any descendants as of yet, but I will say we haven't really had the resources to do that as of yet. So I actually have a call with Noah, which I think he's on this call right now. I have a call with him. He's a genealogist after this call, and I'm hoping he can help me some, or at least point me in the right direction. I am a very amateur genealogist, meaning I have been able to do some research on my own family, but Margaret, as you know, as being a fellow, a previous research fellow, that's one of my goals for the upcoming years, groups of research fellows to focus on, finding those descendants of both sides. I think it's something that, like Brian Stevenson said in that video, other groups have had these hard conversations, and in the United States, we haven't. I mean, people are afraid to talk about it on both sides of the fence. I mean, even within the Black community, lynching is not something that anyone likes to talk about. I have some family members that when I found out this information about our family, they were interested in it. And then I have some that they don't want to talk about it because it's horrific. And then I have some that are like, well, that's in the past. Why are we bringing up the past? Why don't we just move forward? But we cannot move forward because these things are going to keep coming up because we haven't resolved them.
Yeah, and I know that you mentioned earlier, Joy, the sort of difficulty of doing research. And I think that that's such an important point, because when I was working in the fellow position for JCMP, I thought a lot about sort of the violence of erasure from the historic record. And I'll say, just as an anecdote, the person that I did research on was killed in 1898. And beyond newspaper articles, the only thing I could find was a Treasury Department report completely focused on his perceived crime, and offered no identifying details. So it's really difficult to find that type of information on folks. And I think that's a really important part of this project. So there's a question from Karen. She says, is Birmingham one of the communities that is working collaboratively, or are there turf wars which stop things from getting done? I like the phrasing of that.
That's a good question. So no, you know what, Karen, I can be extremely transparent with you. The Birmingham community has actually been really supportive. I know exactly what you mean about, that's why I laugh. I know exactly what you mean about the turf wars that stop things from getting done. But no, we have not run into that really. And I don't want to call it a roadblock by any means, because EJI is very good at what they do. I just truly think that they were overwhelmed with the response that they got when the museum opened up. That has been our biggest roadblock, I think, just collectively, is, waiting on the green light for them as far as getting the actual monument. But no, the city of Birmingham, they are one of our community partners, and they have been supportive of any marker installations we've done. The one that we did at Sloss Furnace, there was plenty of city representation. And then within the city of Birmingham, just the neighborhoods, we've got neighborhood coalitions, and many of them form from neighborhood associations that have been very supportive. And we just did a virtual event with the Brookside community, because they will be installing a marker, and they were very excited. And the work that they had been already doing, they are restoring an old African American cemetery out there. It's amazing. And nobody knew about this work they were doing. They have so many stories that are literally only verbal, and we're losing people. So once those people are no longer here, we lose this history. So I'm just really excited to be able to make these connections in the community to help, document this history. Because like you said, Margaret, when you were doing your research, only being able to find what's documented from that time period, it's a very one-sided story. So no, to answer your question, Karen, no.
Definitely something to be thankful for. Another great question. This one is from Jimmy. He says, have there been any serious conversations that you know of in local, state, or national governments regarding reconciliation? In other words, is this becoming a real conversation, or has it been only limited to small groups and NGOs?
So not that I know of, Jimmy, not serious conversations that would actually change systems and policies. Because, we can have these conversations all day long, just like you said, with small groups and NGOs. But the policy and the systems, like that's, we see these things, these injustices that keep happening, and it's not because we don't have people that understand that these things are wrong. It's because the systems are still in place that support these injustices. So I would say on a local city level all around the country, of course, more progressive cities, you may see more, but I know they're happening on a city level in Birmingham. But on a state and national level, I would say no. I'm hopeful that it will. I have a lot of feelings about that, because politics have gotten so polarized, I would say within the past 10 years, that I'm cautiously optimistic, but I heavily on the cautious. But I am hopeful. I'm hopeful because I do see an increase of these small groups and NGOs, and I see an increase in the diversity of those small groups, and that's always empowering to me, because I get it. Most of us that are on this call, we get it. It's about that one person that comes to a small group that might be stepping out and doing something that is against everything they've ever been taught growing up and everything that their whole family and friend circle believes, but then they learn something or meet somebody that has had a different experience and take that back to their group. And I mean, you're not going to be able to change everyone, but that's how it happens slowly.
We have another question that's coming, but I actually want to ask one first, just in response to something you just said, because I think this is such an important challenge for anybody trying to do this type of work, which is, how do you connect with the people who are not already on board? How do you ensure that you don't have sort of a self-selected group, showing up to programs or community conversations? And do you have any strategies for that?
What we've found more strategically is through our community partners. That's where I've seen it as much so behind the scenes. So I'll give you an example. One of our community partners is Rotaract, which is more of a professional group. So they, this year they launched a diversity ambassadors program, because I think every organization launched a diversity program this year. And they asked us to come and present and lead a conversation at one of their meetings. So of course, people think diversity, they think one thing. They didn't know this group was coming in to talk about lynching. I mean, it's a lot of times to those groups, it's always kind of heavy and surprising. But there were a lot of people in that group that probably if it would have just been advertised like, a conversation with the Jefferson County Memorial Project, completely separate from this professional organization they were already in, they probably wouldn't have come. And there were some looks and a lot of uncomfortableness in the room, but they left with something. They left with a different perspective, whether they liked it or agreed with it. It was something that they heard that they probably hadn't heard before. And, I always tell people, it's kind of like an awakening. Once you learn this history and make these connections, you can't unsee it. You start seeing more of it, actually, and you start seeing more connections of how these broken systems still exist today. So that's one more of a strategic way that I have seen it, just from our community partners that aren't your traditional social justice small groups and NGOs, but more so broader organizations. And then through those outliers, like I said, those people that they are so frustrated and almost wanting to go against the grain of what they've always been raised on and learned about, and then them taking it back. And then also making sure that these meetings and these small groups are safe places, because some folks do really want to learn, but they're so afraid they're going to say the wrong thing, or offend someone, or not be welcomed, or be the only one that they don't come. So we do, especially when we're in person doing these events, we usually have a trauma counselor on site to talk to someone if they need to leave the room. We try to provide resources like that to make it a safe space.
That's great. And that's great advice. Thank you. Diane had a follow-up to Jimmy's question, which was, has a reconciliation program been defined or outlined?
You know what, Diane, I don't believe so. Not actually solidly defined. That is one of the things that we discuss in some of our small groups and our meetings. What does reconciliation really look like? What does it tangibly look like? So in short, no, I don't believe so.
And one more question that's come in, do you have programs in the schools?
Yes, that is a great question. So I probably left that out in my little spiel I did about educate, but we do have a high school curriculum. It is available by requesting it on our website. And then we do other programs, like we do a high school essay contest. And Margaret, you know a little bit about this from the historical marker process. So previously, the high school essay contest, it's facilitated by us, but also by EJI, and it has previously been attached to whatever school district is in the area where the historical marker is going up. But they have opened it up going into next year where we can do it countywide. So we're really excited about that because it does provide the prize for winning the contest is a scholarship, a small scholarship, but still it is a cash prize. As well as, you know, thinking about as we've been strategic planning for next year, we partner with the Greater Birmingham Arts Collaborative to do an arts program with Bush Hill STEAM Academy where students are able to look at not directly lynching because these are younger students, but they look at self-advocacy and self-preservation from the standpoint of the Green Book and some of the lessons that Dr. A.G. Gaston taught. And they do artwork and they create poetry. And we're looking to, whether that be virtual or in person, do a program where they can present their work toward the end of the spring. So in short, yes, we do have programs in schools. It is more difficult the younger you get to introduce this history, but there are ways. It doesn't have to be directly tied to racial terror, violence, but it can be directed to the topic of racial injustice.
I have to say, I'm so impressed by the breadth of work that you all do. I mean, I think it's just incredible. I have one more bigger question and then one more tangible question I'd like to throw at you, since I think we have a break and them coming in the chat. You know, this is sort of a pointed one since we're undertaking this civil rights project and this series focused on past and present. But I'm curious, you know, how you explain to people, you know, why it's so important to understand the historic roots of things in order, like, I guess what I'm talking about is, so y'all are doing all this work and advocacy around the prison system and mass incarceration and doing more of that. How do you sort of explain to people in a few sentences, you know, why it's so important to understand that whole historic legacy to have those present day conversations?
Because of Ahmaud Arbery, because of Breonna Taylor. I mean, you know, this year it was hard for everyone. I mean, it's been a traumatic year, but I can honestly tell you, we do this work so when things like that happen, we don't get so desensitized to this stuff that it becomes normal, and we understand why it's so horrific. So when I first saw the video of Ahmaud Arbery, first of all, if I would have known it was going to be that graphic, I wouldn't have watched it. But it gave me a visual representation of how my great-great-grandfather was murdered. He was, in the newspaper article, it said that he was shot to death in the woods by basically a firing squad who would have been deemed law enforcement at the time. And it really traumatized me, like seeing that video in 2020, it just was horrific. And the fact that he was just running in the neighborhood. And so that's why we do this work, because if you don't know that history, you wouldn't, like, for the life of me, I can't believe we're not calling that a lynching, because it was. I think people think of a lynching always as a hanging, but that wasn't the case. But I never saw myself doing this kind of work. I don't think I ever saw myself doing social justice work. I have a degree in art. I was a graphic designer for almost 10 years. I was a much more lighthearted person than talking about heavy stuff like this. But you know, I did grow up with a dad that left Birmingham in 1963, grew up in rural, kind of like outskirts of Birmingham. And he told me stories about the Klan riding through the neighborhood and them having to, you know, run inside from being outside playing. And so I was never naive to this stuff, but to see it still occurring this day, just in a different shape, form, and fashion, and just even to see like just the increase of hate crimes all over. You know, I always say my term is cautiously optimistic. I still am very cautiously optimistic that we really can make some significant change, but I think we got comfortable. I think we thought, you know, for a time period that racism, you know, had died down, it wasn't as prevalent, but then we started seeing all of these hate crimes, you know, really for increased heavily, I would say, within the past 7 to 8 years. And so, and if you don't know your history, you really don't know how to not repeat it, because it doesn't repeat, but it rhymes, and it's rhyming heavily right now, so.
Oh, I love that. It doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. And what a powerful answer. And I should say also, you know, just thank you for being so open with us today and sharing so much of your personal experience. I know a lot of this stuff is just so heavy to talk about, but it really adds something to the conversation. I think we actually have one more question coming in, and then I'll end with one question after that. Linda is wondering if you have law enforcement as any of your partners.
So not officially as a community partner. We have done like panel discussions. We did a really good program. I think it was last year. It was when we could still meet in person. I remember that much. And we did it with the Offender Alumni Association, and it was a really great panel about, you know, how can we actually be supportive of those that were once incarcerated, once they are released. And we had law enforcement on the panel. And more so as partnering with them as far as being a voice in the conversation. But that's one of those things I think we are looking forward to. It's one of those tangible things we can actually do. This year, of course, has been a crazy year, but definitely looking forward to continuing more of that.
That's great. And we have a last comment from Karen, who says, we appreciate you, Joi. And I'd love to ask in our last 3 minutes, just how can people get more involved if they'd like to? If they're walking away from this inspired, which I'm sure some of them will be, how can they get involved with the Jefferson County Memorial Project?
Absolutely. You can visit our website. I will actually type my email in the chat. You might get my out of office because I'm actually going to hopefully put it on tomorrow, but I will receive it. And I promise I do respond to all of them. But right now, of course, it has been difficult for us to really utilize volunteers just because we're not doing in-person events. Usually we have plenty for volunteers to do, but right now it has been difficult. But we do have a lot planned coming up in 2021, whether it be virtual or in person. So there will be help needed. I am the only paid staff member, so as you can imagine, it is a lot, but it's something I truly love to do. You know, it's one of those things I prayed and prayed when I started doing social justice work. And those that are familiar with nonprofit work, it's difficult and it's more so on the lower pay rate, but I prayed, I said, you know, if this is really what I'm supposed to do, please make a way for me to continue to be able to do this. And that has happened through the help of everyone that helps out. So please, if you are interested in getting involved, I have just typed my email in the chat. Send me an email. I might not have a way for you to get involved at this moment, but I assure you there will be ways in the near future. So please reach out.
Great. And I see we actually have 2 minutes left, so I'll let Dahlia's question come through. This is a sort of more practical question. It sounds like Dahlia has read all of the books on the list that you put out 2 years ago and is wondering if you have some more to recommend, which is great.
Dahlia, stay tuned. So I'm so excited that you asked that question. So as we've been kind of planning for next year, T. Marie King if anyone is familiar with her, which I don't know how you could not be, but she's our head of our public education committee. She has actually drafted a list of books for next year, and she's also trying to do like a combination of family reads, so something that the parent can read while the children are simultaneously reading something that's lighter, but will give them something to talk about. So I don't have that right now, Dahlia, but it will be coming up early next month. So stay tuned to our website. Also, if you don't follow us on Facebook, follow us on Facebook. It's just Jefferson County Memorial Project, and on Instagram at JeffCo Memorial. And we will be sure to post those as soon as we get that list together.
Yeah, and to plug one more time, keep an eye out for more Tier Dope programming. Also, if you're wanting to engage with this material, we will be having that details on that driving dinner tour soon, and a number of really exciting events in spring 2021. So I will put my email in the chat also, in case anybody here is not a Beth El member and wants to be put on a list to receive information. And with that, I will say thank you to Joi so much for joining us today and for your time and generosity and sharing. And if anybody would like to stay on for a few minutes for breakout room discussions, you're welcome to do so.